Hi, everyone. We are here for podcast number 2. I'm so excited to introduce you to Claudia Brenner. She is the co-CEO of the Catastrophic Wildfire Prevention Consortium at Crowddoing, and she's the founder of Atomic Strategic Design. She's such a fucking badass. I'm so thrilled that she's here to have a conversation with us today. Welcome, Claudia.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so grateful.
Oh my gosh. I just think you're the coolest.
That's it. We're done, right? I don't think you can.
And cut.
I don't think you can beat that.
How do we know each other? And how did you get your start in climate work?
Well, we both know our dear friend Betsy Burrows.
Mm-hmm.
I've been friends with Betsy for, over 20 years. Okay, so good fortune that I have. And in fact, she invited me to when Trellis was Covo, invited me to the opening here.
And oh my gosh, did you come?
Yeah.
You were here in
I was
2016?
here. Yeah. It was so amazing because like all these people are there. Betsy's like, you've got to see this place. And so she takes me on a tour, and the architecture and the design is so amazing. And I'm not one, I'm like very heliotropic. So wherever the sun is, I gotta be. But when I went down into that basement, there's so much light down there, and the design is just gorgeous, really. I mean, it's a place that people want to be, which is rare, right? I mean, how many basements do you want to go hang out in? And
not a lot.
No. It's so that was good. And over time, since she's been coming here, right, she'd be like, you gotta meet Rebecca. She's running Trellis. I just love her, and you guys have to meet. So, and then, I guess, I don't know how long ago it was, but she made me come to one of the happy hours that you have on Fridays, right?
Yeah.
And that's how we met.
So it was maybe a couple years or 18 months or so.
Yeah.
I think a couple years. But I had forgotten, or I never knew, or probably I had forgotten that you were here back in the olden days, before times, in 2016.
So cool. I just love this place.
Did we ever meet then, or we didn't meet back then?
Yeah, hard to say.
I don't know either.
Yeah.
Awesome. And how did you get your start in climate work?
Well, it's really interesting when you ask about like climate work, because a lot of people go, I want to go do something about climate change, right? And so that's not how I got into it. But my initial introduction was I was working on visualizing systems and mapping, and a good buddy of mine, Bob Horn, who's like one of these premier pioneers in visualizing systems. There was a celebration at the hub in Oakland. And so he invited me. Long story short, I went there and I met a person who started talking about landscape regeneration.
Mm-hmm.
And now, I don't know if you know what that is or other people do, but
like regenerative agriculture or regenerative agroforestry, or
all of it. So It can be like any type of land. So it could be as much as 300,000 hectares, size of Greece. And so I started doing some work in that, and working with like a little bit with World Wildlife Foundation, but Eco Agriculture Partners they have an amazing practice with Sarah Scher. And so I started getting knowledge about that, and learning about the earth, and like, oh wow, look what's needed in this world. And also, which we'll probably talk about through this, there's so many opportunities and things already happening in that space. The other part that was interesting about the landscape regeneration was that because the land is so big, it could take billions of dollars, right? So how are we going to fund that? So another thing that happened was the group of people that I was talking with and learning with were looking at what they call blended investment capital. So that money could come not just from venture capitalists, but sovereign countries, right? Or like huge pension plans like the state of California. Maybe not. I'm not a finance expert, but I thought the important thing was, how do you take like a 10-year project over time and fund that?
Yeah.
And in that process, I ended up meeting Bobby Fishkin, who I later am working with in Wildfire. So, eventually what came around was that. And so I can talk more about like, why did I get into wildfire? But that now I feel like I'm full into assisting with climate. But to me, because I'm a systems person, that's a piece of the challenge of what we need to do to make our world healthy and thriving and all that as well.
Would you talk more about that climate is one piece of what we have to do? Like, what else? What do we have to do?
Well, I think we have to, the things that we do, okay, I've been in technology most of my career, like over 30 years, right? And I love technology. I love shiny toys and they do so many important things. But at the same time, when we change the system, for every force, there's an equal and opposite force, right? We learn that in physics. And so when we do something, there's always a consequence, good and bad, right? And so because we're in this earth, right, that has living systems, whether it's, a mountain or, insects, butterflies, right, the ocean, the land, the air, right, all of that together, we need to, as much as we can, be harmonious with the decisions that we make within that system. So important. And I started learning that in the landscape regeneration. And thank God, I have a background in some life sciences, but I studied people, right? My brother actually has a degree in plant genetics. And so I was like, oh, that was so smart. Because the more I learned about land and plants, and these other natural systems, the more I get that the better we know how to be harmonious and work within our home, the better we'll do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What are you the most proud of having created so far in your career or your life, or is it still to come?
I think I've done things that I'm really proud of. I have to say, I've been so lucky to be working in amazing companies. People diss companies a lot, but I've had phenomenal experience. It doesn't mean everything every day is perfect, but I've worked with these amazing teams of people. But to answer your question about that, I kind of when I saw that question, I thought, what I'm doing right now is probably what I am proud of, what has already happened. But I'm also really thrilled and excited about what's going to come of it because of the way everyone's coming together and the collaborations. And unfortunately, these wildfires are just getting worse and they're expanding in their geographic space. Now Texas and was in Spain and, more in Germany. And so because of our climate, which is why part of the main thing we're talking about here is those extremes in the weather, whether it's drought or excessive rain, are throwing the balance off.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm really proud of the work that all the people, amazing people that I get to work with every day, as from people from all kinds of backgrounds. This is a multi-stakeholder problem. It's a it's government, it's business, it's academia, it's associations and all the philanthropies and all the communities, right? All the communities that unfortunately have to worry about this growing challenge is there. And they call it the Mediterranean climate, So like, unfortunately right now, we're not in Asheville. My heart goes out to those people. I know somebody who literally just flew out to Colorado, right? And so they're dealing with the opposite. They're dealing with the extreme floods.
Yep. I was in that. Yeah. I was in Hurricane Helen a few days ago.
No way.
Yeah, I just got back. We were trudging through waters up to our mid shins. That's another story.
Oof. Yeah.
But
sobering.
Yeah, I wasn't there. I was in
but still
Maryland. But the tropical storm went up, and we were out. We were in it. We were physically in this storm on the beach.
Yeah. Wow.
So, what is the consortium and the work that you're doing? How are you helping prevent catastrophic wildfires?
Okay, on many, many fronts. But let me start with the initial vision that Bobby Fishkin put together. And I really went, wow, I think that's something I could really focus on. It's the idea that how do we prevent the catastrophic wildfire? So if you take a wildfire, the costs are so enormous, right? And they're just finding that out. There was a government report that came out this past year that said almost 400 billion to just under 900 billion in 1 year of costs. And that didn't include all the costs of wildfires. That is so huge.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So people have no clue. Like if we look at the connected risk, you know, it's not just the homes or the cars, you know, it's the health, you know, people who are breathing in these toxic fumes, the long-term healthcare consequences, the effect on, you know, plants and animals, and like even Paradise, their water, you know, they couldn't drink their water for 3 years. So
yeah,
pretty extensive. So the idea is, okay, coming back to the idea is what if instead we focus on prevention, right? Because right now people are doing suppression and response to the fires, and, you know, definitely some prevention. It's not like that's not happening. But how do we shift the dial dramatically?
Yeah.
And one of the ways we do it is we take a blended approach. So we take a synergistic portfolio, what I call synergistic portfolio of practices to do wildfire mitigation, to obtain resilience and regenerative practices. What do I mean by that? So right now, like people are tending to their homes. They're home hardening. They're, you know, making sure that the embers won't get into the roofs and stuff like that. They're looking at their surrounding areas as well. The defensible space is called. And they're saying, let's pull out the vegetation. And in addition to that, there's early detection things. So we've got like satellites now. It's pretty amazing. It's just, I'll tell you, the stuff that's happening is amazing. So these satellites looking down at the earth, and they're making them more viable, like shorter time frames, higher acuity, to be able to see like a fire sooner. But the other thing that is happening that's actually now since I've started is more people are using nature-based systems like goats, right? Goats are like natural lawnmowers.
Yeah, I saw, we saw goats.
Yeah.
On the side of the highway.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we were astounded. We're like, how is that in 2024, how is that how we're doing things?
Yeah.
But you're saying like it's a better solution, and for what reasons? I'm confused by the goats.
It's a great question. They're so cute. But on the serious side, I'll give you an example. In Aldercroft Heights, right? So one of the things really proud about that we did, and we're still working with them, is to work with the community to do their strategic planning to help get funding and stuff like that, and test some software that Tammy Schwartz, who had a company called Black Swan Analytics, she's now at Guidewire. Anyways, a lot of information there. But so we were looking at this 250-acre location, and where would the goats be, right? Where can the goats go? So it's very steep on one incline. And to get these machines that pull out the vegetation are huge, right? And if you have this huge incline, the goats, man, they can climb almost a wall. And you just send them in there, jump, 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 jump. You know, it's lunch for them, like, you know. And yeah, you know, it's not so simple. You got to put fences, and, you know, they don't, you know, sometimes they have to eat poison oak. They prefer other things, you know, so there's the mechanics of that. But you can actually, you know, look at the costs, which is what we did in Aldercroft. Actually, we did a lot of baselines to say, well, how much would it cost and where exactly in Aldercroft? And so Aaron Hardiman, who's actually pretty knowledgeable about this, like scoped out, you know, that northern side where they think the fire's actually going to come from. But it might not come from the north. So you have to be prepared on all the parameters, like where to to where to go. So the goats are actually just this amazing, that's what they do naturally, right? And so, while we're hacking away with these machines, which can be really important to use, they naturally go in there, and you can bring them back and you can monitor it. So there's a combination of technologies and nature-based systems like that. And
that's wild. Yeah. So the goats, because we were talking about how it must be because it's steep. That's the only explanation that we could come to, that why goats would be selected over machinery would be because it's steep. Is that right?
That's part of it.
That's part of
it.
You
could take them on a flat land. You have to look at the economics. One of the things is when you pull out the thing, do you pull out all the roots, right? Is that good for the land? When you pull too much vegetation out, you can get erosion and landslides.
Right.
So Aldercroft last year, I'm trying to remember which year we're in now, but they actually had I think it's 2023, I have pictures of it. So their road, actually all the dirt road came up. They can't use their main road anymore because of all the rains. So once all those, micro systems and climates came in, yeah. And so we need better ways of capturing the water coming down into the areas right now. So when those rains came down, they went back into the ocean. And we need the rain to water things, to hydrate the soil, to hydrate the systems. Yeah.
And so goats don't just take everything. They take what's on the surface.
Yeah.
So it's also better for erosion.
Well, I'm not an expert. So for the people who are like, I don't know, I would say that what I did learn is it's a portfolio, like it's a blended solution set.
Yeah.
Right? And the idea is you cost it, right? You look at how much it's going to cost, how do we bring it in the resources of the community and all that. And we did a combination. When we talked with one of the companies that has the goat herds, they could bring in 400 goats, right, into an area. They need at least like 40 acres to start, something like that. Otherwise you could take probably 3 goats in Aldercroft and get someone to hang them out, in their yard.
Yeah.
And do that. So there's a lot of ways to go.
Yeah.
And I think though that's part of the tool system that we're putting together, is to help communities get that. Not only there are a lot of decisions to make, but we can do this. Like we can actually, methodically come in and make really good decisions and optimize their resources to be able to do what they do. Yeah.
And if you're looking at that sort of expense when there is a catastrophic wildfire, are there organizations that are down to pony up money to prevent that from happening? So I was asking about the kind of the finances of how you fund prevention projects.
Well, it's a perfect question because we're at that. I'm trying to think of the point. That place where we've been doing what we've been doing to create the tools and the mechanisms, which we still are working on. But I am just putting together a sponsor package. Mm-hmm. So the idea is, how can corporations and other entities, different foundations, in addition to governments, because I think it's a combination. Again, it's that blended investment mm-hmm. that I kind of learned about, right? And so we're looking at in communities, who has a vested interest, like a lumber company, like a tourism up in Okanagan in Washington, for example, or like another area, there might be distribution systems down in southern LA, like an Amazon, right? Mm-hmm. Those are companies that have a vested interest in if a fire happens, right?
What about like the utilities? Because doesn't PG&E get sued all the time?
Yeah, they have a huge. It is such a challenge because in the United States, a lot of the wires are above the ground still. Like in Europe, actually, it's a lot better. And then there's also this work to be able to cut down all the vegetation around it. So they're another vested party. So we're looking at kind of 2 ways: is how can the communities participate and the companies within those communities. And we're getting ready. We have an innovation showcase. That's a wildfire innovation showcase that we're doing with venture starters. Yeah. So Mark November and his wife Norma, we're partnering with them in November. Tentatively, we have a date for the 13th, but we're finalizing that. And we're going to have 10 innovators who are going to help, who are, working in the wildfire space, to come and present and pitch their products to investors and to the general public. Yeah. And so I have a sponsor package getting ready, finalizing that.
Yeah.
And so I've already talked with someone in insurance. And so insurance companies have a huge vested interest, right?
Yeah.
Because they have to pay out the claims. So wouldn't it be better to invest in prevention or, mitigation? Risk reduction is kind of the way that the United Nations and those groups talk about it, and others in disaster. So, yeah. And I think we need to do it at a larger scale. So this is just for right now. I think we really have to really go for millions of dollars and billions of dollars in the end.
Yeah.
Like even in Aldercroft, we did 2 grants, right? But we did a combination of multiple innovations, right? So we had these different partners, and satellite vision, and even a guy with an airplane, and he had cameras on his airplanes to actually look at the land and see what's happening. And then, just the monitoring and the analysis of the risk. And so we put together 2 grants to help Aldercroft in their planning and the management of that, as well as, we did put the goats in there in one of them. And each of those was over $2.7 million for that assessment. And that's a community of 126 homes, small, right? But, what's 2.7 million if it could be $1 billion, right?
Yeah.
So that's part of the education and some of the work we started to do. I call it total cost of wildfires. I keep doing that. So total cost of wildfires. And because if we look at all the connected risk and we measure that, it's a clear argument, I think, unfortunately, at this point.
Yeah. So could you explain a little bit about systems innovation and systems mapping and systems integration? Like for a layperson like me, what does that mean? And how do you kind of think about this connectivity?
Such a good question. It's something I'm working on to be able to explain that easier.
I know you have some diagrams.
I do.
And I know we are not in a position to look at your diagrams.
I know.
So you're going to have to use your words.
Yeah.
Or maybe we can show something later. I don't know. Can we show something later? We can add it in script.
Okay.
All right. So I don't know if you want to
super amazing. Yeah.
Explain your diagram that is not here but could be here.
Yeah. I'm thinking of which one. I've been doing different types of diagrams and maps, and people think of maps as geographic systems, right? You think of a map, I'm here and here's where I want to go. So conceptually, these maps are similar kind of thing. Here's where we are, right? Where we want to go. How are we going to get there, right?
Yeah.
And so that is also there. But I've also been working in multi-dimensions. So I call this process multidimensional systems design. And I actually, in draft, have a cartoon book to actually talk about how to do this, right? Because if you think about it, I can think of a general design process, which of course I have a map for. So it's right there. And And so I'm really big on process and best practice, right? How do we do that? But when you start looking at a system, people are like, oh, we're going to boil the ocean. Oh, we'll never get there. And I'm like, no, I think the thing that's important to consider is to know what's in that universe and think about all the things to consider. You don't have to look at everything, but it is really important to do the discovery process, to do the research, to go into the field and say, and watch, how, at Aldercroft, I did the planning with them. I didn't just interview them. What do you think we should do, right? Which is really important. We did the market research. We did all of those things. So there's a discovery process, right? And that's looking at what is in that bigger universe and in the map of what we have. And some of the things are like, who are all the audiences, right? Mm-hmm. All the stakeholders. And you have people who create the thing and people who use the thing, right? So a lot of times they say, people will go, oh, there's an audience. I'm like, usually there are multiple audiences. We're looking at many segments of a population, mm-hmm. right? And so we have to layer those, and we can show that in maps. Another thing is what I call flows, right? So we can talk about processes and workflows, but what about money flows? You know, how's the money flowing through the system? Let's show that, right? Let's actively show that. We can do interactive visualizations, right, over time. Yeah. In fact, we in our team right now, I'm so excited. We have someone who's going to be mapping the innovators and all that, and like the locations of where they are. So we can look at something over time. We can also look at it two-dimensionally, but we can look at it like in a virtual environment, right? So I'm working with someone right now who is an amazing designer who can we can look and map the whole system. So I don't know if I'm getting clear enough, but I can give you a couple examples of 2 projects if you want.
Yeah.
So
give me one, and then
okay.
Then maybe 2.
yeah. No, I'm thinking which one. I
mean, the way that you described discovery and understanding who all your audience is, that makes a ton of sense. I can totally picture, and I would imagine the communication is different depending on which audience you're talking to, and if it's more of like a broadcast or a dialogue or a forum or like a fireside chat, kind of like depending on how you're communicating.
Yeah. So that
all makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, it can vary. So last year I worked for the Army's Futures, and with a company that hired me, and we were looking at global situational awareness, right? And designing some software to be able to do that. And so they were talking a lot about the Ukraine-Russian war at the time, right? And people always go, oh, how can you do a full system? Well, that's what I was looking at and mapping, actually. So we had like all the points and how they interact like this. But if you think about it, something terrible and as simple as like taking down the electric grid in the Ukraine, right? Now people are homeless, right? So there's a homeless factor. People are migrating out of Ukraine to Europe and other places, right? So there's migration systems. The damage that's been done, 30% or so of wheat production is in Ukraine and Russia. So now the food supply chain is being impacted, especially in Africa, right? So that's another implication, right, of showing these connection points, right? And with that food supply, then people who were condemning the invasion, right, now won't, because they want their food supply, because their people are not going to survive, right? So now the NATO, all those political interactions are affected. And some of those countries are going to be like, no, we're not going to condemn the war, because they have to feed their populations, right?
Yeah.
And another thing that was happening in that war, and all of this I have mapped, right? And
that's amazing.
Yeah, so interesting. Mapping the disinformation that's happening, the cyber war, right? And the implications of the propaganda on different sides.
Oh, wow.
And then
you've mapped that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's why when people go, oh, let's just focus, I'm like, yeah, we can, because you could take a map like that. The beauty of looking at a system and the interactions is you can zoom in, right? And zoom out, and zoom in, zoom out. So we can use many medias, video, data, all the visuals, animation, to be able to show these systems in a way that we can grok information and understand it way faster, make it more relevant, enable the communication to improve, which improves collaboration and better decision making, right? Because in a system, we're looking for like where to optimize.
Yeah.
It's like that optimization is huge. I always think of systems like whack-a-mole, the whack-a-mole game
Yeah.
when the thing comes up. And so the challenge with a system is like people, they'll go, oh, that's, we're just going to focus on those 5 steps, right? So when they focus on the 5 steps, they don't look at what I learned as the feeder systems, right? Like what I just talked about, like all of a sudden the food, people can't eat, they have to survive, right? So you solve a problem here and it pops up over here.
Yeah.
So that's why having a bigger view of this whole thing is really important.
Are you, I have to ask this because we're
Yeah.
in San Francisco and it's like land of AI.
Yeah.
Are you leveraging AI for any of the work that you're doing yet?
We're going to. Yeah, Bobby's like all over it, and that's been really helpful because of looking at like what are some of the best LLM tools, large language models, right? Mm-hmm. AI is actually a huge amount of different technologies. It has many branches, and so right now we're really hearing about ChatGPT. So it's that large language model. It's incredible what's happening. So he went ahead and loaded our scorecard that we have into that to see if we could do if we can enable people to just dump their data into the system. But there's still a lot of specificity that needs to be put into the data. So when you're using AI, it's really important the data system, what the data is, how accurate it is, that you have knowledge about that.
Yeah.
So yeah, to me, absolutely. The whole idea of the work, I mean, I got trained by IBM. I'm so grateful and so lucky, is that it's a tool, right? It's understanding, how to leverage any technology, what sensor systems, AI, and we are on a rocket ship. I feel like with AI, I've been on all these waves for many years now, like these different technologies, which is such a blast. It's like surfing on these waves.
Yeah.
But this one is like, I'm on the rocket ship. I feel like when I used to take Southwest Airlines, in the plane.
Feeling like G-forces.
And you're like riding backwards. And
yeah.
Like, oh my God. Yeah. And I feel like that's where we are. So there's just so much potential.
Is the scorecard that you were talking about, is that what the UN is? Is that the UN work that you did?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yes.
Could you speak to that a little? That's so cool.
Thank you.
You have stuff that the UN is leveraging. That's just like,
yeah.
That's a big deal.
Well, I have to give credit. Thank you. I have to give credit. I've been working, our team's been working with Peter Williams, and he is the president of Arise US, right? And so that is an organization. I never say this right, but I'll try it now. It's a pro bono organization that deals with public-private partnerships with the United Nations DRR, which is the Disaster Risk Reduction, right?
Okay.
So they work with all disasters globally, right? And Peter's and his team and all the volunteers, I'm part of that, an amazing group of people, look at the U.S., right? And so Peter, when he was at IBM, with his teams, came up with this idea of a scorecard, and wasn't just an idea, they made it for resilient cities, right? And so that scorecard is now in about 400 cities, he said, have, interacted with it somehow. So he came to us, actually. We had this conference, this Wildfire Symposium. I was trying to remember for this interview, I think it was around 2021 in October. So, and we had about 200 something people, and we had all these speakers and stuff. And so he had a symposium, and he's like, hey, we should work together. And I looked at his scorecard, which is so good. And of course, I'm biased, being blue-blooded IBM. He had worked for that. And he says, do you want to do a toolkit? And I'm like, yeah. And just so you know, like when I worked at Kaiser, I helped build the Kaiser Permanente Sidney Garfield Healthcare Innovation Center. So
you've worked on a lot of things with really long, complicated names.
So yeah, I know. I was like, I should write these down because I can't remember them. So, but that in itself was an amazing experience, where we did experiential testing. But I created a simulation toolkit for people coming into that healthcare center, right? And that there was amazing. thing where people were simulating in a mock hospital, we had a mock hospital, mock clinic, mock home, open prototyping spaces and meeting spaces, right? We could like roll through, like literally we had doctors and nurses and pharmacists and pretend patients and stuff, like wheeling things around. Anyway, so coming back, when Peter said, would you like to do? I'm like, yeah, that'd be great. So moving forward to present, we started putting all the things together for the toolkit. And that's about how, now that you kind of know what you want to do, how do you go do it, right? It's huge, right? But in the interim, he's like, why don't we do a wildfire scorecard? So we can use the same practice we did for resilient cities, but let's do it for wildfire. So we pulled in some experts and our team, we brainstormed and all that. So the scorecard is now 120 questions. It's a lot. It covers area like governance in a community. It's community based. I think the difference is a lot of the work that's being done is about homes, right? And how do you think about the whole community, not just, a home or that neighborhood, right? So it's targeted to that. And so with the scorecard, governance, engagement with the community, we also look at the risk assessments, like I was talking about earlier. Are they funded? How do they get funding? And the infrastructure, like think about it, all the electric grid that we talked about, but the communication systems, right? Those get, destroyed often. And so there's no communication systems. You've got security systems and sanitation systems. So need to be planning for all of that.
Yeah.
And then you've got your different cycles within the disaster system itself. And so there's a response when from the fire teams, that's a response versus the communities who are like, can I survive? Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a cycle. And so it's really important that we address all the cycle. So how do you recover? How do you prepare? Like that. And so the scorecard is that. The difference between the toolkit and the scorecard is that the scorecard helps them assess where they are right now. Like, this is it's like a baseline.
Yeah.
And you score yourself. You score your community.
And then you see where the gaps are and where you can focus efforts.
Yeah.
So is it something that government officials would do an assessment, or communities like school principals would do an assessment, or would I do an assessment? Like who would use the scorecard to understand where we're at?
Yeah, great question. It's a combination. It's a multi-stakeholder process. So what we try to do is pull a whole group in. I could give you an example from like Aldercroft. But you have community leaders, often from FireWise or Fire Safe communities, those kind of organizations. Not everyone has organized like that. So it could be like a person who's in the municipal government there. There can be people who even like we interacted a lot with, like we have this division chief, Ed Orr. And he's over 5 divisions, right? But he really looks after his communities. So he helps like that. So you get the fire people, you have city planners and things like that. It's so comprehensive that it's good to get a full stakeholder view so that you're really representing the whole community.
Yeah.
That's what I would say. But I think that what I've really seen is the leadership of those communities. They coordinate with the community people and then the government people. And then we also want to pull in the businesses too. I think that's really important. And associations, So, you might have a place with the university and then that would be important too.
Yeah. And I would imagine, I don't know if you're doing this, but I would imagine that getting students involved, it will help with the next generation of awareness of like what you're working on and why it's important and how younger folks can get involved and be part of the solution.
Yeah.
I think that's something so many people are struggling with. It's just this like climate anxiety or climate despair. and what you're working on is such a tangible, like this is a way of supporting climate resilience.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I deal with a bunch of people who are grad students just coming out of school looking for jobs, so they come work with us. I even have people who are in college right now working with us. They're just all stars. It's amazing.
That's awesome.
The work that they're doing. Yeah. And I think to have hope is so important. If we don't have hope, what do we have?
Yeah.
But, you know, as humans are amazing, right? As brilliant as we are and destructive as we can be, we have those polarities. But why not dwell on the things we can do? That's the way I see it. Like, it's all possible. If somebody could land on the moon, what could we do? Like,
I love that.
Right.
I think that's a really beautiful sentiment. As, what did you say? As powerful as we are and as destructive as we can be, why not focus on what we can do and like the hope? Yeah, I really like that. Speaking of, what would you say is something, so you're working on this like systems scale and like these huge projects. What would you say to someone who is at home that wants to support these climate initiatives? Like, what can somebody do?
Well, a couple things. First of all, if you're worried about your home, you can learn about what to do to protect your home and your family. Like prior to the work I'm doing now, I did a home evacuation thing, interactive animation. Actually, I have, it's really fun, about what their pitfalls are, but what you can do. So I said, just for yourself, like, how do I take agency to protect myself?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Get your go bag, get your evacuation plan, things like that. Now, beyond, if you want to participate, what is your interest, right? Like, I was thinking about that with the questions. It's like, well, I'm interested in plants. Great. Go look at what landscaping is needed, right? Oh, I'm interested in animals. Well, how do you protect the animals? Like, how do we make sure that they're well and safe and healthy? Or how do I, people might be involved in the ocean, right? Or just health, right? If you're interested in healthcare, I worked in healthcare for like 9 years, right? What can we do to make sure we wear the right mask, that we have the right air filters, right? How do we get educated to know? I mean, one thing that people don't know, you really need like an N99, N100 mask. Like, a lot of people wearing N95s. I did the research. If you have 2.5 microns, that virus, though, it's all going to get through, right? And so, like, something simple like that is devastatingly important, right? So,
why isn't anyone talking about that?
I almost did. I still want to. I was going to build a whole site on that because I was the reason I'm doing this work is because I now have like a cough. I couldn't breathe. I had to get out of town, right?
From wildfires or from
wildfire.
COVID or?
No, from wildfire.
Yeah, we did too.
Right? I mean,
that's how I got into this work. Our smoke alarm went off at 3 a.m. from a fully sealed house. Wow. And it was a literal wake-up call. And Sawyer, my son, woke up and he was like, my throat hurts. What's happening? And it was heartbreaking. And I was like, all right, we all need to be fixing this. This is not a problem that is just going away. It's in my house. It is a wake up. That was my wake up call moment of, we should all be focusing on how we support our planet and try to fix what we've broken.
Yeah, I 100%. I literally, when the first wildfire came, I had a fractured foot, and I was laying in bed and my window was broken.
Oh my God.
And the apartment, they're like, too bad. And I'm like, no, this is like toxic. Yeah. And the day that the sky turned orange, a couple of years later, 2020,
yeah,
I was like, it felt like Armageddon. Right?
It did.
And I'm like, I got to do that was it. I was going to do food systems, which I still want to do. That's a whole story in itself. But that was it. I'm like you, it was a wake up call. But now every day I wake up and I'm like, no matter all the crap that's going on, and we hear a lot of negative, we don't hear as much positives. Tons of great stuff happening every day. I wake up and I'm like, I feel fine because at least I'm doing something.
You're doing it.
Yeah. And then all the people that I work with are so committed.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that. So that makes me think of another question that I have for you, which is, you have your company, you're co-CEO of this other company, you have all these interests and other projects that you want to do. How do you, from a systems perspective, how do you manage your energy and your time and your kind of emotional resources to advance these initiatives without just like burning out right away?
Yeah. It's such an important question. It's such an important ongoing challenge. Yeah. And I would not say I have mastered it all. I am working so hard right now, but it's joyful. Like, I think the thing, it came across to me a couple of months, and I'll come back to that, is, when I worked in the Innovation Center, when I work in design, we can have joyful fun in serious work, right? And it really occurred to me, like, why not take that on? Because it's fun to solve problems. It's fun. And so to me, whether I design a logo or I work with a team and they design something really amazing, that's joyful. And now I'm working with our partners internationally who are on the mission, joyful, right? I do work a lot right now. No, but to manage that, there's a couple things. Just personally, I'm doing a lot of meditations right now, all kinds of different practice, even to get ready for today. And it just really grounds me and energizes me. I walk the San Francisco hills just to clear my mind. I've always been an athlete and just love, really working out. Getting enough sleep, all the basic stuff. And at the same time, constantly, a lot of this work takes what I call portfolio management. So I have a background in product management, right? And that's when you build these monster software systems, right? Like even to this week, we were looking at like evaluating all these innovators, right? So we have to look at their financials. We have to look at their market fit. We have to look at the customers and who they're serving, right? We have to look at what is the innovation? Is it technologically, is it really going to happen? Is it working, right? So there's all the different questions of like, is this appropriate, right? Is this what's needed, right? So to do that, I have this monster spreadsheet. And so I put all the parameters down. It's a quantitative view, and that's a whole process in itself. I used it for all the Kaiser software platforms I did, Applied Biosystems, Global Systems. It's a way of taking tons of stuff, and at the end, you have your analysis of like what the priorities are, and then there's this gut, of like, okay, do we look at the limiting factors? Do we look at the feasibility, the resources and things that can come in? And that's where we go. So it's a process, but it's so doable. I think people try to work really quick, and it's really important to have that agile, prototyping and, test it really quickly. But at the same time, strategically, if you put a good strategic roadmap in, what I call I have a cartoon where it's like a backbone. It's not like the backbone doesn't move. It's attached to a person and it's moving, but all the things on the side, they could be agile. But you kind of know where you're going and you can modify that. But it's like a ship, maybe not that slow, but it can be adjusted. But if you don't have a plan, any action's going to get you wherever, right?
Yeah.
And I think what I've seen in organizations, especially with startups, is this like kind of fury of like, we have to get something done, we got to get something out. And we need to blend the two. Like I never stopped that fast. I'm like, go, I've learned, let that momentum go. But at the same time, let's have some strategic smarts about how we're doing that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
On
I think so.
Multiple levels.
Yeah. That does make sense.
Yeah.
Is there anything we haven't covered, that any question that you really liked, that you were like, oh, I really want to answer that one, or anything that you want the world to know? I don't know if we have any listeners, or we have if we have anybody, any audience, but one day we will, I think.
It has happened.
So what's the biggest challenge that you've faced in this work?
I was thinking that one of the biggest challenges when working with Aldercroft, this is where ignorance is great. Sometimes you don't, from what I found, it's like going to a movie. I don't want to know the story, because it influences us in a way that, that won't work, right? Or whatever. So it was like, let's do a grant. Okay, cool. So we set out, and the first grant that we did, it was about, I'm trying to remember the first one. It was for vegetation management, probably, I'm trying to remember exactly, but it was, something about the community and what they needed to do to be more prepared. And at the time, we were taking, Tammy had some software, and we were looking at like all these metrics and measurements of how to do that.
Is our goats gonna be a part of this story?
Yeah, they were. But I think, so we put, like, what I was talking about before, we put the satellite company like Betterview, and Wildfire is another company that we brought to the community, and now they're off and running. They actually have an early detection system, so they can actually look at smoke and know, is that good smoke, bad smoke?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so they were just still developing their product, right? Like they didn't have a full product. We were prototyping for them. So that's kind of cool, right?
Yeah.
And then we had this guy I was talking about before, Firewatch. I hope I'm getting everybody's name right, you guys. So Firewatch. So he like literally flew his plane over and had cameras and, looking at the vegetation. So we put that into the grant. And then we had the monitoring. And I think what was so powerful about that, which want to bring to other communities, is looking at, like, what is the time that the fire trucks get to a home? Do they reach a home? How are the roads? Are people able to evacuate? Like, is the road wide enough for the truck to come up? But other stuff as well. So there's a huge list of 17 parameters, 44 parameters. So we put this all into a grant, right? And we're all excited. And then we find out, we didn't get the grant. But then what happens is the grants by CAL FIRE are so important. And they're very targeted, right? Very specific. And so you have to apply just to that specificity, right? So what we did is we're like, hey, we got all these innovations, and isn't this great, right? Well, first of all, it's a lot of money. And second of all, that didn't fit the box, And so what I learned after doing another one called the CWDG, so that was from the federal government, through possibly, I think, Department of Agriculture and U.S. Forest Service, is, we did another one similar like that, is that they're not looking for tons of new innovation. They want tried and true stuff that they call field ready, and that they know is going to go into the field. They're going to get the vegetation cut, or the plan is going to be made, right? So that,
so they can show the results. Like, you said you were going to do the thing, you did the thing.
Yeah.
But it's like a box.
Yeah.
That you can check off, that then you do the thing and they can check off their box that, like, it worked.
Yeah. And really important. Like, I'm a real big believer, like, when I do strategies, it's really important that the implementation is actual and that it gets done. And the work I've done is it's modular, it scales, it goes global. Like these things go into the world, right? Not all strategies get done, which shocks me. Like 80% of them fail, I found out, which I don't understand. But going back to the grant, it's like, wow, so where do we take all these innovations? And so a lot of things are like one-offs, and the research that the prevention derivatives team as part of the crowd doing had done, before I got in an example in Deschutes was that it took a portfolio of all these practices together to mitigate the wildfire, to actually make it safer, right? So I think there's an opportunity for the education to be able to go and to make that, I think another challenge.
So you're saying that like the biggest challenge is that you're doing too much to get access to funds. Like you can't access funds to do all of those things. You have to kind of like pare it down and pick and choose. And yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, I don't overclaim. Like I am positive because I've done these projects and they work and there's high adoption and they scale and they go. This one's not just an industry, it's many industries. We have the insurance industry, right? We have all these industries. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges. But
when you also have to get all the stakeholders to the table and you have to get everybody in some level of accord to advance things.
Yeah. And we had other stuff more on the personality. Well, I don't know if we want to go into those. But, there's human behavior things where people are protecting their turf. They see you as a threat. So we had that. And, that happens all the time. I think, like, in the past, I remember, like, I was a strategist because, they hear systems design and mapping. That's part of, but to me, that's the frosting on the cake. It's the research and the strategy that's like so important that we get that, well. And I lost my train of thought there, but there's something, gosh, what was it? Yeah, it'll come back.
We're talking about challenges.
Yeah, but there was so like one day I woke up and I'm like, people need to have strategies, and if people had strategies, and then I looked at myself and I'm like, okay, Brenner, have you done everything you think you should do today? And I was like, no, and I'm pretty high demand, and I'm learning to be kinder to myself of that, and then to really be grateful for what I do. So that, just take that with a grain of salt. And that gave me a lot of compassion, right? Because to change our behaviors is something that we're evolving, right? Our technology has evolved way faster than our human capability of emotional fitness, of communication, collaboration.
Yeah.
So that stuff is always there. But I'm having a lot more fun because I don't take it as personally anymore. And I, it's like not a game, but it's a puzzle, And so if you look at it like that, it's so doable.
I like that a lot.
Yeah. Like you can break all these systems down, like that multi-dimensional systems. It's like, check. Did I think about that? Check. Yeah. So I think if we spend our time there, those challenges are there. But to me, it's so fun. Like, I love that. For every challenge is an opportunity.
Yeah.
If everything was working, we wouldn't have anything to do. I could do that. I could like be on the beach eating bonbons.
Yeah.
I could totally.
Doesn't sound terrible.
Nah. I love to play. Yeah. I love to travel. So yeah, I'd be fine doing that.
So tell me what information in terms of if people wanted to get in touch with you or learn about, are there websites or handles, or how do we promote Claudia Brenner or the companies that you work for?
Yeah, I'm thinking, of course, a couple. LinkedIn is a best way. Like my LinkedIn is Claudia-Brenner. That's one. The Catastrophic Wildfire Consortium. Right now we have the Scorecard website, which is, okay, bear with me. It is scorecard.preventwildfire.world.
All right.
And then you have atomicstrategicdesign.com. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a wrap. I think that was an amazing conversation. That was incredible.
Thank you.
Marcella tells me that I need to thank people now, right? Okay. So let me thank Marcella, my producer, who's behind the camera and making all of this actually happen for me and for us in the world. We have our amazing guest, Claudia Brenner. This is Badass Women in Climate, our second episode, and we are built out of Trellis, Coworking and Events, which is trellis.social. We have this recording studio here. It's one of the many things that we offer to our members. Our handle on Instagram is Trellis Workspace, and I can be found on LinkedIn at Rebecca Bryan Pan. Everything will be in the description. And thank you so much for being a part of this second episode of our podcast, Badass Women in Climate. Thank you so much, Claudia.
Thank you. It was fun. Thank you.
It was fun, wasn't it? Yeah.